Welcome back to Highly Respected. I'm your host, Scott Greer, and today we're going to have another incredible episode, just like always. And so we've got a lot of great topics for you guys today. So hopefully you sit back and enjoy and appreciate the show. And obviously the topic we're going to be talking about is the same we talked about last week, because this is the number one news item in the world, and that is the Israeli conflict and everything going on in the Middle East and what to expect from that. And there's also other themes that I'm going to bring up. It's the chaotic situation in Washington. Republicans don't have a leader, don't have a House Speaker. Biden is growing even more senile, and there is just nobody driving in Washington. But we will go to the situation with Israel and primarily what's happening on the domestic front and how people are responding to it. And I think the real thing to note is how insane this conflict is driving people. It's the level of discourse on Twitter, particularly, from like the Israel supporters, is just insane. It is just frankly insane. It's like, these people have lost their mind. And it's just showing that all these people, like, they talk about caring about America, like they're like, oh, we're America first too. And that all goes aside to them obsessing over Israel. And it's like showing their true country that they are. Like Ben Shapiro's rants on his show have just been insane. Like he's somebody said it's like the time for facts is over. The age of feelings has begun. Which is true. He has on his show, it's just completely emotional, near tears rants, diatribes about anyone who is not pro-Israel enough. And last week, we're just not going to, it might not be the most structured podcast today because we're going to be riffing on a bunch of different topics. So going with the, how insane people are, is his reaction to Tucker Carlson's view on what's going on in Israel. And Tucker was, he did, a sober, level-headed, balanced show on the Israel subject and how we need to primarily focus on America and our borders rather than what's going on in Israel. And he brought up how, tens of thousands of Americans are killed by fentanyl every year and drugs. Fair point. And Shapiro just lost it on Tucker. I think most people listening to this would have been aware of this, but it's just like, he's like, Tucker, you just don't understand. People, how is Hamas like fentanyl? People choose to shoot fentanyl into their arms. Hamas went and shot these kids. And he's just like losing his mind. He's just like really angry. He's just like he's about to like start yelling in Yiddish at Tucker over his many crimes. And it's just like he's getting worked up about it. And the other interesting thing from that rant is not just that that's what's expressed by Ben Shapiro. And Ben Shapiro is arguably, now with Tucker gone, you could argue that Ben Shapiro is the most influential voice in conservative media, or at least his institution of Daily Wire, which not everyone in the Daily Wire is going full on insane Zionism. Matt Walsh is having some different takes. Candace Owens is defending people who are being opposed to the war and not going full on full-blown Zionism, war hawk mode. And so there's a few people, which that's probably putting them in hot water at Daily Wire, but everyone else is just gung-ho about it. And Mark Levin is going crazy. Fox News is going crazy. Like the stuff that boomers would listen to from talk radio, their favorite Daily Wire podcast, and as I said, Fox News, they're full on dead babies, decapitated babies, Hamas, bloodthirsty killers. It's time to wipe Gaza off the map. And maybe that's not the best mentality to have going into what could be potentially a regional or even a global war that could emerge from this. And not good to indulge that type of bloodlust. But yeah, that's just like one aspect of it. It's going crazy. And also all these people have began turning on Tucker. It's all these DeSantoids who have been sucking off Tucker for months. Someone like Dave Reboy and a lot of these other DeSantoids who are always like, oh, I love Tucker, or look how I'm friends with Tucker. Look. And now they're turning on Tucker because he was insufficiently pro-Israel. And he made the point that we should focus more on America's problems than others. But that's not like all conservatives, because I think one thing is, with the new media environment, especially with the new Twitter, people are able to express their views and are learn about different views that they would have otherwise never been exposed to in years past. And you are seeing a lot of conservatives question the narrative. I mean, the number of people who are, fairly big personalities who are sharing Nick Fuentes clips was incredible. I mean, Lauren Chen, who would probably know that it's not, maybe not the best career move, was sharing a Nick Fuentes clip and saying like he's more reasonable than the entire political establishment on this. And if you're listening to like Mark Levin, yeah, that would probably be the case. That Nick is offering a more reasonable, well balanced, level-headed view of the conflict than a lot of these people who are supposed to be telling the boomers what to think. As I said, like Levin, Shapiro, and others. And I mean, they're just going totally insane. But you're seeing that content, and conservatives are really upset about it because it's usually the younger conservative crowd who, and I think this is different from millennials and Zoomers when it comes to conservative commentators, because, I came up in this 10 years ago. I got my first political job over 10 years ago, actually, and back in 2013. And all these kids who are like dopey Gentile kids from state schools were like rabidly pro-Israel, and they weren't even like they weren't even evangelicals too. And some of them were, but a lot of them weren't. A lot of them weren't even Catholic. And I was like always weirded. It's like, why do you are that into Israel? That doesn't make any much sense. But it's just the content that they consumed at that time. It would have been the same exact content that the boomers enjoyed, like the talk radio and National Review and that type of stuff. And that is what the level of discourse is. Now for the younger crowd, for a lot of these Gen Z guys, they're not listening and following along to the same boomer stuff that the others are, and they're not listening to people who are gung-ho Israel. They are listening to people like Nick. They're listening to I don't know if they're listening to Highly Respected, but maybe they're listening to Highly Respected. I don't really talk about this issue as much as others, but they're following along to a lot of different content, and they're not as hyped up on this. And I think for a lot of people, unless they grew up in like a very type of Christian Zionist environment, and that's a lot of evangelicals are into this stuff. I don't think they would have been exposed to this viewpoint, and a lot of the conservative content that they have been reading and watching isn't as obsessively pro-Israel as it was before. It's either focused on other topics, and when it comes to foreign policy, it has a much more non-interventionist line. I think that's a big reason why. That's another big reason why that people aren't as going to war, bloodthirsty as they would have been in the past, is that there's this non-interventionism that has become much more popular among younger conservatives. Like, they've been hearing normal conservatives tell them about how they shouldn't be involved in Ukraine, that Ukraine is a waste of American tax dollars. Zelensky's a bad guy. Look at the failures of Iraq and Afghanistan and Libya. Why should we be continuing to do one of these foreign interventions? And so for a lot of the younger crowd, they see like, a lot of American neoconservative foreign policy is bad. And then they see this Israel conflict that, emerges, and they've seen all the content and all the things that they've learned about Ukraine, and they're much more skeptical about it. They're, especially these stories that are coming out, a lot of people are aware of what the propaganda war that was going on in Ukraine with both sides, like claiming these atrocity propaganda. And they're seeing this stuff again with Israel, and they're much more skeptical about it. They're not wanting to beat the war drum. They're aware of what happened in these past foreign interventions. They're aware of what's going on in Ukraine and how that doesn't benefit America. And they're much more inclined to non-interventionism than interventionist neoconservatism. So that is a big reason that I think that there's a change in youngers. And so if you're looking at all the people they're mad about, it's generally the people with a younger audience. Lauren Chen, some of these other TPUSA influencers who are saying this stuff. Elijah Schaffer, even though Elijah Schaffer is a little bit, they're trying to push him out more of Connie, but he still has a large, normie con audience. Lauren Chen absolutely does. And, and definitely with Charlie Kirk, that's probably the funniest thing is like Charlie Kirk, is really pro-Israel, but the fact that he doesn't follow the line, he was wondering whether this might have been a false flag allowed by Israel, and he was questioning about attacking the war hawks and stuff. It is like very milquetoast stuff. And even then, they're like, this guy is an anti-Semite. Ben Domenech is like, and all these other losers are saying like, this guy is an anti-Semite. TPUSA is going to be an anti-Semite organization unless they replace Charlie Kirk. And it's like, who the hell are they going to replace him with? Like, probably the people they would replace him with, like, believe this even stronger, views on this matter than Charlie Kirk. And it's like, who else is going to do that with Charlie Kirk? And it's always like the funny thing when an organization is, obviously there are problems with Kirk, but, outside of the problems with Kirk, TPUSA is fundamentally a project centered around him in the same way that Project Veritas was centered around James O'Keefe. And the idiots behind Project Veritas are like, we can get rid of James O'Keefe and keep the institution going. But then they get rid of O'Keefe and it immediately shuts down. They don't have a person in the waiting to take it over. And, that's what happens with, the same thing would happen with TPUSA if they got rid of Kirk. It's just a funny suggestion they would make. That aside, that's outside of the problems with Kirk. I think that's just a fact of the matter is like, if they got rid of Kirk, it would no longer be TPUSA. And a lot of probably it wouldn't be as big as it was before. It's tied to that persona. There's not like somebody waiting in the wings. Like it's like they're expecting like Ben Shapiro to become head of TPUSA or somebody like that, or just some random Daily Wire personality who's follows the line. But it is interesting that all these conservatives who are more online, have a more online audience, a younger audience, are not as thrilled with Israel and are more going to an anti-interventionist line. And that's like mainstream conservative world. That's outside, obviously, with the dissident right. That goes without saying what its opinion on Israel is and the conflict. But, it's all non-interventionist. So, but even for normie conservative world. But it's hard to see how that is going to translate into real world opinion. I have been seeing some people who, there's like people who are like having strong anti-Israel posts, and and some of it, gets a lot of traction, like 20,000 likes. And some of these people are saying like, oh, we're the future, we represent the real masses and stuff. And they definitely are reaching a certain amount of people. But I think another thing is a lot of things online aren't real. And it's hard to gauge public support from what's going on online and what's big online. Like, it's always funny when like people did polls on the presidential race, like the primary, before like DeSantis started sinking, all these people would like say, oh, look, DeSantis is the number one candidate on Twitter. But obviously in real life, he was not the number one candidate. And you can also see that with some of the engagement on Twitter. It's like a lot of these people are maybe not Americans. A lot of them might be Arabs in the Middle East. So it's hard to say. Like there's like one account. I think it's Lucas Gage or something. And I wonder, it's like, wow, he's getting a lot of engagement. I'm like, I wonder who's tweeting this stuff. And it's like all Muhammad and Abdullah and stuff in the replies. And it's not everyone, but I think a lot of that support is coming from Muslims. And it's hard to understand how many of those people are actually in America. And for the one thing is that conservatism and Republicans are still dependent on these boomers. And the boomers are still overwhelmingly in favor of Israel. I saw a poll that was really interesting on this matter of a generational gap. And it's showing like full support for Israeli military actions against Palestine following these attacks. And it was 81% of 65 and older who are 100% behind it. But then there's a massive drop, or a significant drop, from the 50 to 64 crowd. It's about 56%. And then the I think it's the 35 to 49 demographic, it's 44%. And then among the 18 to 34 demographic, it was 27%. And this was a poll I saw on CNN. And that's incredible figures. That is also figures you would have not seen. I always say this is like, it's almost a cliche. It's like you wouldn't have seen this 10 or 20 years ago. But this is 100% true. You would have not seen this 10 or 20 years ago. And it is like a younger demographic that is not as into Israel. And why is that? Some of it is they're maybe they're not tuned into cable news and talk radio, which is like full on propaganda. They're turning to other news sources if they're listening to news. Some of it is a lot of the minority population. I don't want to say like all whites support Israel, but it's more that minorities just don't give a shit about Israel at all, especially Arabs and Hispanics and the new demographics coming in. But it's even the same. But even the figures are different among whiter generations. Gen Xers are still pretty white and pretty conservative too, and that would be, it doesn't look like it's a bare majority. It's not neatly divided into generations because a lot of the 35 to 49 demographic includes millennials, but most of the 50 to 64 would be Gen Xers, and so I would say it's only a bare majority at most for Gen Xers, and it's really just the vast majority of boomers are that. And, that's an interesting note. So it's hard to gauge what this means. In some ways you could, the bleak way of looking at this is that, or one way of looking at this is like the younger generations are more left-wing, and by being more left-wing, they're more inclined to being anti-Israel. But I don't know if that's the case. I think it is like a trend even among conservatives, or at least the consumers of conservative content, that they're less inclined to be pro-Israel than their elders. And I think that's what you're seeing a lot now. But one unfortunate aspect is that the entire Republican Party, with maybe the exceptions of Thomas Massie and Rand Paul, are fully gung-ho about Israel. I mean, even if you go to Gates, Gosar, you name the person, they're all about Israel. Which, I mean, you can see the kind of ridiculousness of how pro-Israel is that there was a congressman from Florida, Brian Mast, who is not Jewish. He's an evangelical Christian. And somehow he served in the IDF, and he got an IDF uniform, and he decided to wear it around the Capitol to show off his support for Israel. And there's something very weird about a congressman serving a foreign nation. And he doesn't even have an ethnic tie to it or anything like that. He just really loves Israel, which does show like the fervent evangelical support for Israel among that demographic. But it's very bizarre. It also just shows where Republicans are on that issue, is that a lot of the stuff we're seeing online and conservative commentary is not being reflected in the party. Now, that could change, in a few years, or maybe there will be a few people emerging that can say that. I don't see among the current crop outside of Massie and Rand Paul. There could be another surprise, maybe Eli Crane, I don't know, who could say something like that. But it's unclear who would go all in on like reflecting some of the conservative skepticism over Israel and going to war for them. I don't know where you would see that among the Republican Party, among elected lawmakers. It's a very different scenario. We'll talk more about the Republican Party later on in the podcast because we're going to go over the speaker situation before we get to some of the cognitive lead questions. Actually, I do have a relevant cognitive lead question I want to answer now. And I don't want to name this person because I think he's going to get a lot of hate for just asking this question. No, it's not New England refugee or any of the other common ones, but it is someone who asked questions before, but I will keep him anonymous. But he asked this question before, and I thought it would be interesting to ask. And he asked, I know there's going to be some people going ballistic over this question, but he asked, Regarding Israel, Scott, what do you think of the dissident right maybe just supporting strictly rhetorically? And what he means by that is just saying, oh, look at these savages butchering women and children in the first world country just like us. This is why we need a Muslim ban. This is why we need a border wall. Attacking BLM. BLM is America's Hamas, tying it to decolonization. And he's saying that we would not get involved militarily. It would just be these rhetorical send-offs to Israel. For commentators, I would say, or dissident right, no. I would say no for a couple of reasons. One, we don't actually gain enough by that. First off, that is not good enough for people like Ben Shapiro. They want like full on, like we'll do whatever Israel asks. We're with Israel 100%. You know, if Israel nukes them, we're for nuking Gaza. If Israel wants us to take in 1 million Gazans, we're for that. They, there's like very high hoops to jump to satisfy their demands, and they just, we're never going to be able to satisfy that even with a rhetorical position. And you don't gain enough, and also you commit yourself to a lot of things to satisfy them that otherwise I don't think we want to commit ourselves to, like supporting a regional war or taking in all these Gazans that they get out, that they cleanse out of Palestine. I don't think we want to be a part of that. And the second is, I'm just taking this from a pragmatic standpoint of why it'd be no for the dissident right. And this is the dissident right in general on why that. And the second reason is our audience is not ready to go for this. Our audience is extremely anti-Israel. And so you could never convince our side to even do that. Even if there was a practical, pragmatic reason, you could never convince our side of this. It's like our side, it'd be one of the core things of our side is being hostility towards, or for a lot of dissident right people, is anti-Israel sentiment, and you could never convince them to move the other direction, even if you wanted to. It's like, hey guys, let's have a pragmatic, let's say, hey guys, let's just say we're pro-Israel, but we're not for funding all their wars and stuff or getting involved militarily. You wouldn't convince our side to do that anyway. They would have a full-on revolt if you try to convince them of that. So I think, the rhetorical support, first off, we gain nothing from it. We don't benefit from it. And you're just going to piss off our own audience. So those are the pragmatic reasons for that. If it came to Republicans, because where Republicans are is completely different from dissident right. Right now, Republicans are like, let's have Armageddon for Israel. Like, let's nuke Iran. And you're seeing that as the mainstream positions. So just being rhetorically pro-Israel while opposing, full-on military intervention and using it to push our interests or our message with this on immigration restriction and being anti-BLM, that's about as much as we can expect from ordinary Republican politicians. Maybe one day you could see full-on criticism of Israel and a completely different position, but we're not there yet. So for right now, if you had a politician that was, I'm pro-Israel, but refused to vote for funding for them or more funding for them, and was fully opposed to the war and was primarily focused on keeping out Palestinian immigrants from this country, then I think that would be fine. That would be about as much as we can hope for. But when it comes to dissident right, completely different standards we have versus ordinary Republicans. And maybe Trump will have this position. I hope that Trump will take this opportunity to, instead of, to talk more about the Muslim ban, which he is doing. He's bringing back the Muslim ban. For some reason, DeSantis is attacking him for not talking about a Muslim ban, but literally his big speech last week, and Trump was talking about how we need a Muslim ban and to keep these people out from terrorist countries, while Team DeSantis, I guess, didn't read any of the newspapers that have covered this and are attacking him and claiming that only DeSantis is bringing this up when DeSantis is actually following Trump's line on this. So both Trump and DeSantis are saying we're going to focus on this, but DeSantis is using some really cringe rhetoric about this. He's saying, the reason why we don't want Palestinians in this country is because They're anti-Semitic. They don't support Israel. We don't want that. We don't want those people in our country. In Florida, we've banned anti-Semitism because they're a part of the woke mind virus. And so that's DeSantis' line. That is the one thing. There's a little bit of debate on the right over whether we should be happy that now they're talking about deporting Muslim immigrants over Hamas support, which I don't really like that. I don't like the cancel culture, or I guess the cancel culture mechanisms with it. Well, there's two things here. I'm going to go with the immigration enforcement aspect, and then we'll go to the cancel culture aspect, which is mostly the immigration enforcement thing is mainly going on in Europe. Is like the UK and I think France are talking about deporting people who are publicly supporting Hamas. Now, if this is one way to get rid of Muslim immigrants, I guess it's good, even though I am disturbed, but I am worried about the reasons, because they could very well say, that does show like the state power could go against anyone that they deem offensive. Is like, we're going to arrest anyone who has a problem with Muslim immigrants too. They could easily do that as well if the media demands it. And so I am uncomfortable with the reasoning, but if it leads to fewer Muslim immigrants there, I would say that's otherwise correct, but you do have to be really worried about the reasoning of that, because it could very well be used against our people as well. So you have to be careful about that. But, I'm not going to cry over fewer these people being there. Now there's the cancel culture aspect that's primarily in America, because all these university groups are signing pledges saying they stand with Palestine, and obviously that pissed off a lot of rich Jewish donors to these universities, and they're threatening to defund universities, and they're wanting to fund doxing operations against these leftists. Now, granted, these leftists are absolutely terrible, and so I am once again not going to be cry over these like people who are otherwise extremely anti-white, extremely woke, not getting a corporate law job. In some ways it's good, but also it is disturbing in that this could easily be used against people like us. And it's not quite replacing these people with right-wing people. They're replacing them with slightly less worse people, like smarter libtards. So maybe it might even be a worse situation. But it is good that like some of these leftists won't be getting jobs, but it's not a huge victory. And I don't really like conservatives going full bore, cancel culture, dox mode. I was on the same page when they're going after these idiots who dress up in masks and march around for no apparent reason. I'm saying like, conservatives like, we've got to dox and ruin these people. I'm like, you don't want to turn into Antifa. And here, even though these people are obviously bad otherwise, outside even their Palestine positions are the probably the least offensive aspect about these people. I would actually probably say they are the least offensive aspect, because everything else is fundamentally opposed to a traditional white America, and you don't want these people in positions of power. So it is, there is a good aspect to it, but at the same time, the motivation of it and the full-on doxing mode is incredible. And it's also ridiculous that, how these rich donors have seen all the things that universities have done in the past few years. And the one thing that they draw a line on is like random student groups criticizing Israel. It's like you slept when they were, the universities were going full on anti-white mode and full on like anti-America. Now this is the line that's crossed. And it's like John Huntsman. It's like, you're not even Jewish. Like, why are you so upset about this? It is really frustrating and ridiculous that this is the one thing that they get upset over. Now that brings us to the topic of how the left is reacting to this. There has been some discussions over what is the left's view of Israel, and it has changed from, as I said, just a few years ago. I want to make this point very clear. As if this attack had happened 10 years ago, and 15, 20 years ago, there had been even more so, universal support for Israel. Everyone would have been like, it's time to nuke Gaza off the map. There would have not been these large-scale protests in favor of Palestine in America, and especially in college campuses, you have to, is like the Muslim population has doubled since 9/11, which is what is the opposite should have happened, but it has doubled, and that's why there's so many of these Arabs and others and other browns who are protesting in favor of Palestine on college campuses. And that's like, this is the immigration policy neocons supported, and now they see what's happening, and they're like, oh, this was, I wonder how this happened. Must be safe spaces, and that's not it at all. But they're, it's a completely different mentality of what would have happened. And America would have, they're already a blank check, but there is, some rumblings that this may not be all set for Israel. And you can see this on the left, is that the left grassroots is not thrilled with Israel. It's not that, wanting to have this full on support for Israel. Now, the Democratic leadership is still firmly like, whatever Israel wants, we're for. But that's not really shared by the Democratic grassroots, largely because it's non-white and it just doesn't really give a shit about Israel. It's either just doesn't give a shit about Israel or it sympathizes with the Palestinians over Israelis. But that's not yet reflected by leadership. But this could change in some degrees. Now, you are seeing funny moments like MSNBC has banned or temporarily kicked off the air all their Muslim anchors because they're too pro-Palestinian and they just want a pro-Israeli line. But I think as the number of bombings happen in Gaza and they see all these dead kids and stuff, it's what Israel's doing too. It's like the bizarre propaganda where we're seeing on social media where both sides are like, look at our dead kids, and then you have to wonder whether this is an old video clip, whether this is manipulated media. You're like, what? I don't know what to believe here. I bet they're having a competition between dead kids of what it is, and it's very weird for like a state to just like share pictures of dead kids on its thing, but that's what both sides are doing. And so, but that's still the line. It's like decapitated babies, and that's it. And even if you see the public discourse around this, is that sports games are having moments of silence for Israel. The Thursday night football game had a moment of silence for Israel, and there was like a fan in the crowd who said "fuck Hamas" at the end of the moment of silence, and the crowd cheered with that. And even there was a moment of silence at Sunday Night Football, and there's been a moment of silence at all these MLB playoff games. And it's like showing that, for people who aren't even politically engaged, that they're supposed to be upset by this. And you would think if there was a major backlash against Israel among the general population, you would hear people booing at the games and other things, but you're not. You're seeing people say "fuck Hamas" at the end of the moment of silence. So it's a very different. The general population, by metrics that you can gauge their opinion on this, they are sympathizing with Israel. But it won't. I don't know if it will always be the case, because if Israel goes in and has this full-on invasion where they're, wiping out tons of civilians and the news media is going to cover it, I do think a lot of the sympathy, at least on the left, is going to change. And I think it's become a more difficult situation for Biden. And also, Europe is just not going to sign on for this stuff. And Biden does not want to have that scenario. I think one thing is that we're worried about the conflict escalating beyond its borders. I think that risk is maybe not as high as last week. I think Israel knows it doesn't want to have that type of conflict, and also Hezbollah and Iran don't want to have that type of conflict. So everyone's like kind of agreeing that it should be kept to Gaza, but I think Israel's still trying to figure out what their invasion of Gaza is going to look like. They know that they would get bogged down in urban guerrilla warfare, which is not what they want to be faced with, and it's going to lead to high casualties among them, and with diminishing results. It seems like they still haven't committed to what they're actually going to do in this. And they're also worried about the international community's response of what might happen, because they know that if like all these pictures of dead kids come out of Gaza, that Europe will not be a fan of this. And this could potentially upset Biden and change his tone to Israel and the war. So they're really testing the waters here with this. But they have to do something, because they have these hostages and there's a demand for blood from their own population. So they're going to have to do something big, but what it is, they haven't figured out yet. I think the bigger risk now, rather than a regional war, and it's something just as bad, is that we're going to have to figure out what to do with over 1 million Palestinians. And nobody wants them. Literally nobody wants them. Arab countries don't want them because they know that they would be a source of social turmoil and unrest and terrorism. Europe doesn't want them because they already have all their other immigration problems, and having another 1 million people come in who are likely to be extremists and be terrorists they don't want to have. And in America, they don't want them here because they're obviously going to see them as all terrorists and as evil people, as all the media has been claiming about it, Palestinians, especially conservative media. And then it's like, why don't we welcome them here? So I don't know where they would go. And it would be funny if Israel obviously wants the West to take them, but the West is like, you're literally saying these people are terrorists. Why do we want to take them? And even like here in America, I think that some of these Israeli firsters would say like, we want to take them, but then we'd be like, wouldn't they just come here and try to blow you up in this country? And then be like, yeah, that's a good point. I don't know. They may change that, but that's really the thing this week that I feel is the highest risk, is that what Israel would want to do is that it'll take and occupy certain parts of Gaza. It'll clear out that population, and that population will go elsewhere. Where they will go, I don't know. But the two main important things that I think is like everyone should have in this opinion is like opposition to American intervention in the war, and opposition to taking in any migrants or refugees from the war. Those are the two clear positions that we need to have and emphasize that we want to not happen, or we don't want a war, or we don't want America to get in a war, and we don't want these refugees and migrants. And those are the two key positions. And so I'm a little bit worried that we may take in these Palestinians, and I don't think they're all going to be 1 million Richard Hanani. Maybe that would be really funny if they are. Right? Like gender studies departments would be on notice. The Al Hanani Brigade would turn into real life, but I don't think that's. I don't think they would be based at all. I'm always like saying like Muslim immigrants are not based and are not likely to become fervent conservative supporters, even if they do protest these wokeness in their schools. Ultimately, they'll still vote for Democrats, and they view whites as a bad thing and want white sovereignty diminished in this country. So in conclusion, it's a very messy situation, but it is like something that's like how insane everyone has gone. I don't think the level of rhetoric we're just seeing on social media is like, people would have been more aware to not have this crazy rhetoric before, but now it's just like going full mask off. And it's just like funny things that are like Breitbart turning their logo into having a Star of David in it and blue, and it's just like so many ridiculous things that are happening, and a lot of people are noticing the level of insanity. But it's like insanity on or chaos. I would say chaos on all sides, because now they're Ben Shapiro's getting community noted. They're saying like this dead baby picture is AI generated. And that depends on which format you use. Some came back that was authentic, but we don't know what we're looking at here. And you always have to have skepticism with whatever's coming out from this conflict. Both sides actually, but you need level skepticism here. I don't want to fall for any of this propaganda. And you're just seeing that type of stuff. You're seeing a ton of stuff that go viral that would have never gone viral a few years ago. I mean, that's a big difference between 10 years ago, is that social media was supposed to be a tool of American intelligence agency and American soft power, is that, it helped stir up the Arab Spring and all, and, unrest against Assad and all these leaders that America didn't like. And now it's being turned against the globalist American empire. It's like social media is just like rife with like information, both real information and misinformation that the the powers that be don't want out there, don't want out in the public eye, and they have zero ability to contain it. And it is especially true or a bigger part of the social media world thanks to Elon, Twitter. So it is good. You get a lot of information out there that you wouldn't otherwise have, but there's also a ton of just like fake videos, AI generated content, and stuff, and no one can tell the difference between what's real and what's not. And so it's a very chaotic situation that you see here. And I could definitely see that the powers that be are not happy with what's going on. I think that's also triggering a lot of the responses among, these Zionists in America, that they're just going nuts because they're seeing all this other information out there. And that's driving up their neuroticism. And they're seeing these protests on universities and they're melting down over it. And, it's a very weird situation. And we don't have any leadership at top. Like, we have a senile president. We don't have a House Speaker. Our Senate Minority Leader is a literally walking corpse in Mitch McConnell. There's no leadership in this country. It's Donald Trump, but he's a polarizing figure, and he's only focused on his legal issues. So we don't really have a leader at this moment, and the world is heading to chaos. And I do think people are a little worried about what's going on, even though they're mainly focused on like football and sports and video games and gambling. I think the people who are paying attention are a little bit worried at the situation we have. But now that leads into Washington without the House Speaker race. What's going on with the House Speaker race? Republicans have had struggled to find a House Speaker, and tomorrow they're supposed to have a floor vote tomorrow, and Jim Jordan is the caucus's nominee, but it's not assured that he will be the nominee. And last week it was supposed to be Steve Scalise, but Steve Scalise didn't have the votes to win on the floor, so he dropped out. And then it became Jim Jordan, who Jim Jordan had ran against him in conference against him. Scalise won by a narrow majority. Then Scalise dropped out, and then Jordan is in there. But it's anyone's guess what will happen. What I've talked to people who are knowledgeable on the Hill, they think that most likely scenario is that Jordan somehow wins, but he's going to have to do concessions to moderates. It really is just how much moderates want to punish the conservative wing. As Jordan becoming the House Speaker is being seen as the 8 who voted to unseat McCarthy as a victory for them. But it's unclear what will happen. If it's not Jordan, it's anyone's guess who can become House Speaker. My best bet would be Kevin Hern, who's head of the Republican Study Committee. Conservatives like him. Moderates don't seem to have a problem with him. He's not seen as a slam dunk for the conservatives, but if Jim Jordan can't become House Speaker, I would say that that's my bet. There is a real threat of moderates like nominating someone terrible and getting Democrat support, or voting for a Democrat, which I don't know who they would do. I don't know if Democrats really want to do this for Republicans. I think they prefer to have the Republicans look chaotic and stupid and incapable of government. And even offering a different House Speaker that is not Hakeem Jeffries is essentially conceding to Republicans, and is a way that they don't want to do it. They think that they can make political capital out of the chaos of Republicans, which is true, and they'd rather have Republicans not have a House Speaker rather than have a House Speaker. It's why help your enemies when they're hanging themselves. And so that's what's going on in the Capitol. Now, if Jim Jordan becomes House Speaker, I would say that the effort to unseat McCarthy was semi-successful, because you do get someone who's more dedicated to what we care about. He's more open to cutting funds for Ukraine, and his number one priority, prior to the Israel stuff, was the border. And I think your best bet for getting something on the border and maybe cutting funding for Ukraine is Jim Jordan. There's no one else. So he's probably the best option that we have. But him becoming the nominee or becoming the speaker is a little bit difficult. So we'll have to see on Tuesday. We'll have to see on tomorrow what happens. But a lot of this is exposing how the Republican Party is turning into the insane clown party in all aspects. It's like Republicans, just look at the ridiculousness of last week. You have Brian Mast, a non-Jew evangelical Christian, wearing his IDF uniform on Capitol Hill. And it's like, this is an American lawmaker. Why is he wearing a foreign military uniform? You've got Nancy Mace strutting herself out, thoughting it up. She went into a conference meeting with the scarlet A on her tight top, which is designed to show off her tits, and you're just like, what is up with Republican lawmakers? And she's like, they're treating me like a whore, and I want to tell you I am definitely not. I'm like, okay, Nancy Mace. I mean, Nancy Mace is like, all of her public appearances are like, guess what? I have sex. And she may be one of the horniest lawmakers on Capitol Hill, which is a big battle, a huge competition for that. Then there was an insane moment with George Santos. For some reason, George Santos was carrying a baby around. No idea who the baby was. He is a gay man, so hopefully, I don't think he would have a baby. And people asked him, "Is that your baby?" He's like, "Not yet." And then he had a whole confrontation with protesters over the baby. And there's also these Palestinian protesters running around, and Republicans are just not being able to come together and be realistic about what they want from a next House Speaker. Conservatives have finally agreed on Jordan, but it actually did take a lot of effort because there were like conservative lawmakers who are like, we don't think he's very good on J6 and Jack Smith stuff. And it's like, it would be great if the House could do something about that, but the House has incredibly limited political capital, and there's no fucking way they can defund like the J6 investigation in Jack Smith. Like, most of the, like, at least a third of the conference would not support that. And they would just vote for whatever the Democrats want. I think at most you have 2/3 of Republicans that would be on board with that. Maybe, might even be less than that. It might be even less than half of Republicans would be on board for that, for defunding that stuff. And obviously could never get through the Senate, couldn't get through to Biden. So what's even the point? The only thing they can get something done with is definitely the border. And now with the new Israel situation, they can probably do something about Ukraine. And I think some of the Democrats are realizing that we don't have an infinite checkbook for both countries, and we're going to have to pick who we want, and they'd rather just wind down Ukraine before it escalates even further. I think that's like the best opportunity for that. So those are like the two things you can maybe hope for a House Speaker to do. And anything else is just like not likely. There's even people who are like, we need to have someone who's going to completely ban abortion. It's like, how the hell is that? How the hell is a House Speaker supposed to do that with a thin majority? So it is really like showing like Republicans is like total insane clown party. All these people from like Mace down others, they just care more about fundraising and creating a spectacle than actually. I don't want to. This does sound like a liberal like talking point, but I think it is like coming to hurt like what the dissident right even wants, which we do want Congress focused on like not funding these wars and doing something about the border. And the clown show on Capitol Hill is preventing that, because all these guys just want to look like they're doing something, get their TV hit, look like they're the most conservative lawmaker there is, when in fact they're just, furthering the clownish aspect of the Republican Party and further advancing the idea that the GOP is just turning to an insane clown party which can't get anything done and is just focused on spectacle and entertainment value, which is what a lot of this latest fight over McCarthy is. And like I said, I'm totally for Gates. People have asked me about Gates. I am still 100% behind Gates. Maybe not 100%. But I'm mostly behind Gates. I don't think it was the wisest decision on this House Speaker. I mean, if we get Jordan, it's a slightly better situation. But I think it come at the risk of making the entire GOP look like a shit show. So maybe that was, and it also pissed off all these other powerful Republicans, and that may hurt him in the Florida governor race, which he's wanting to run for in 2026. And advancing his career is very important for us because we do have a limited number of people who could possibly be the next Trump. And he's one of the few people who could fill out that role. He's got the charisma and he's got the solid policy takes for the most part. And he, so I want him to succeed. And that's really what some of the frustration I had over the House Speaker race is. I think that he did get a lot of public support for it, a lot of attention, but it may come at the risk of hurting him getting institutional support for future races. So, but I'm still Team Gates for the most part. I hope he succeeds. and hopefully it all turns out well. But the GOP, the state of GOP is just clownish. To the ordinary voter, if they're looking at the party, they're like, these guys are idiots. They can't even govern. They can't even legislate. And it's not about coming to compromises with Democrats. It's about wringing concessions out of them to further advance our cause, which we do have. As I keep saying, we have two things that they could do, and they're not being able to do that because of the spectacle that too many people want to create. And for a lot of our audience, they think that the spectacle is actually doing something when it's not doing something. And that's why we now have Nancy Mace strutting around, thoughting it up on Capitol. And nobody's really falling for it, but it's like this is the end point of the spectacle. You just have, and then you have Lauren Boebert's like antics, and everyone's just like, it's like if you present the GOP to like normal middle class white voters, this is why they don't want to vote for Republicans, because they think that this is like the insane clown party. And unfortunately, Republicans on Capitol Hill are furthering that image. So, in conclusion, hopefully Jordan wins. Hopefully they do not try to sell out and join the Democrats and have some moderate Republican that Democrats will support. I don't think Democrats will support that. Moderates really would just have to choose between whoever Republicans put up or Hakeem Jeffries. The Democrats don't really have like a moderate person to support, and they don't want to give any concessions to Democrats. They feel like they're in a powerful position here, and so they're limited in what they can offer. So it'd be Hakeem Jeffries, which would not be a victory. I think that's not a likely scenario. If Jordan wins, that's good. Hearn might be also good, but I think it's all coming at the, as I keep repeating myself, it's all coming at the cost of making the GOP look like a shit show and off-putting to people who are paying attention. Will it matter in the 2024 elections? Maybe if they keep having these speaker races and everyone, they can't get anything done. But, if they get a new speaker and it's relatively calm throughout, people aren't going to remember this. So I have two more topics to discuss with this going forward of things to talk about, is that elections in Europe I actually didn't really get to talk about the elections, but elections actually all over the world. We had some white pills and some not so white pills. Australia voted against their voice referendum, which was going to give this Aboriginal body in their parliament that would have veto power over legislation and all this type of crazy stuff. It was, imagine if we just had like a black delegate, like a permanent black parliamentary voice, and if Congress passed something and they're just like, that's racist, and then they couldn't pass it. There's discussions over what type of power that this Aboriginal body would have in Parliament and this voice, but it did open up the chance that they could veto stuff. And 60% of Australians, despite all the propaganda and the state being behind it and all the media being behind it, they voted against it. So that's very good. The Aussies woke up and voted against the Aboriginal stuff. And Australia and New Zealand are going through a type of racial reckoning and national guilt complex that's even more extreme than America, because Australia is thinking about getting rid of their July 4th or their Australia Day, which it celebrates the white settlers coming to Australia. And there's a bunch of cities that no longer celebrate that. That's a little bit bigger deal than like Columbus Day, because Columbus Day, it's like they're being told that they can't celebrate July 4th anymore. And there's like cities not doing that. There's cities like wanting to rename themselves. They're renaming all this stuff after Aboriginal stuff. They're all having to make these big apologies. But I think that this vote against the voice referendum is like a turning point, and it's moving back. Like, the fact that it was like a decisive vote against it is a massive white pill. So that's good in Australia. In New Zealand, which is very libtarded too, and having a lot of similar stuff to Australia, right-wing parties won. They defeated, the party of Jacinda Ardern, who's no longer prime minister, but like her successor took over, and so they did well. So that's all good. And also from the week before, AfD in Germany continues to improve, and they're doing very well among young people too, which is a big difference from America and England, which I'll get to in a moment. But the Not so white pill is what happened in Poland, which I don't really like the base Poland meme and stuff, but it's not good for like right wing parties that oppose immigration to and oppose a lot of the wokeness and like American style liberalism coming into their country to lose. But it lost its majority, and the opposition gained the majority in the elections, which isn't very good. And even though I think the Law and Justice Party, center right party, has a lot of problems, they've banned a lot of nationalists there. They're responsible for Jared Taylor not being allowed in Europe because he went to like nationalist conferences, and then Poland was upset about it, and the Law and Justice Party is responsible for him being banned from Europe. So that's nothing to celebrate for for them. So in some ways, there's I do like that it will now no longer suffer under base Poland memes, but it's still not good that they voted for this. And it's also bad because a lot of talk has been about continental Europe, young people voting more right wing than Americans. But in Poland, the two parties, the Confederacy, I forget the American, it's Confederacy or Confederation, which is the more right-wing nationalist party than Law and Justice. It got more young people to vote for it than Law and Justice, but at the end, they only got, those two right-wing parties combined, they only got like 34% of the young vote, like the 18 to 29 vote, and like a little bit higher, maybe a little bit higher. I'm trying to remember the polls, but it was under 40%. And the left-wing parties got, over 60%. And so that's in line with what's happening in England and America. And so a lot of people are wondering, like, why is Germany, or why are there these differences in youth voting patterns? And some people see it as like continental Europe as more youth are voting right-wing. But there's different scenarios with this. Because the Poland election wasn't over immigration. So that's like one good thing to take in, is that the opposition actually attacked the Law and Justice Party for selling out on immigration, because the Law and Justice Party has been welcoming in all these guest workers and had plans to expand it. And Donald Tusk, who is complete libtard, total Eurocrat, wants like full-on European unity, turned into a major immigration restrictionist and was attacking the Law and Justice Party as the Open Borders Party and selling out on immigration and talking and even getting into some racial rhetoric as like they're letting in non-white foreigners, not in those words, but paraphrasing it. And that was upsetting a lot of his liberal allies, but he had to do what he had to do. It's the same in what they do in Hungary, is that a lot of these opposition parties in Hungary will sometimes say Orban is selling out on immigration. They even, and some of the opposition, and also the opposition parties do that in Russia if they're smart. And it worked in Poland. So both parties were all trying to say that they're the true anti-immigration. So that's one good thing, is that you should not see this as a referendum on the identity issues. It was more, I think a big reason for the young people is it's once again, the Law and Justice Party is pushing, unlike a lot of other European conservative parties, a more social conservative agenda. And it appeared by voting patterns, especially among young women, they overwhelmingly went for the left-wing parties. They didn't like this, is that Poland has done more restrictions on abortion, and the opposition planned to liberalize abortion laws again. And we, unfortunately, young people, that's what young people vote for. And so I think if you're looking at, in Poland, there's other issues too, but I think that that's something that can be applied through a global lens and applied to America and the UK, or at least America, with why young people vote more left-wing versus Germans, French, and Italians and others. And I think even in Sweden, young people are more likely to vote for Swedish Democrats. Don't quote me on that, but I know in France and Germany, it's more likely for the young people to vote that way. So, and those are like the core countries of Western Europe. So it's wondering is like, why do the youth vote differently than in America? And so going over the reasons is, one, the absence of these social issues that are likely to dissuade young people from voting right wing, like abortion, gay stuff, that type of stuff. Those are bigger issues. I know a lot of the audience who are young people that they want the right wing parties to say this, but the rest of their generational cohort, and I know that you guys who talking to people your age would realize that they're more socially liberal on these issues. And those are a bigger issue in America for young people, and they're much more at the voted on the ballot box than they are in Germany and France. These are just like non-issues for people. I mean, there's some debate over how much state funding there should be for abortion, but it's not to the extent of where people think that, if one party wins, they're going to completely ban abortion. And that does get a lot of young women out to vote, and those young women are able to convince some of these young men to vote also for Democrats based on these social issues. So the social issues, Republicans and others don't win on. The UK is also a different thing, because they also don't really have these social issues. Like, they're not debating abortion in the UK, but they're still losing the youth vote. UK is just like its own scenario. And also the UK, the youth are browner, are less non-white than the older generation. So that's one reason, but it's a lot of these young white kids who are also very left-wing in the UK. So I'm not even quite sure why the UK, because a lot of the explanations I'm going to say don't make sense. But that's another difference between America and Europe, is continental Europe, or at least Germany and France, is that the younger generation is far less white here than it is in Germany and France. And young white men who still pretty conservative, not that different from the older generations, but young white women, and likely due to the social issues and media propaganda, but most of the media propaganda is centered around those social issues. And the fact that there's all these non-whites there, it makes them more inclined to vote left-wing. And yeah, there's like less. I don't think a lot of these non-whites are voting, or at least the younger cohort are voting as high as they do in America. But I have to look at the voting patterns on that, and it's hard to see with French racial patterns, because they don't like to collect data on this. But that is something to consider, I think. And also a third issue is that the young people in these core countries of Western Europe are more confronted by the identity issues, a lot more than young people here. One of the things about America is that you can just run away from these problems. You can go to the suburbs, or you can focus on stuff. You don't really have to face this. Like in Europe, a lot of these kids have witnessed dramatic changes to their cities in just like a short span of a year. And they feel that they see these like once beautiful parts of their city, and they're total slums. Americans from Gen Xers down have accepted that our cities are hellholes. I mean, even boomers have accepted that. So most Americans alive have just accepted that our cities are not livable places for white people, and that they left. And so it's not an issue we confront. And also the immigrants are much more in your face and stand out a lot more in Europe than they do in America. Because in America, we live in our own little islands. If you go to a certain area, you might see more Hispanics. But, it's like you just kind of shrug your shoulders. Well, if you go out in the public area, and even if you're in a small town, you would have never seen minorities there 5 years ago, and now you do, and they're completely different from you. There's not this shallow American mass culture that, they do have that in Europe, but there's also something else that's tied to the specific ethnocultural background of the countries of German, French. There's something that means there, and that these people definitely stand out like sore thumbs. You'll see that. I mean, there's some degree of that in America, where you go to a certain area and you see people in burqas and stuff, but that's not like really common. What you mostly see is Hispanics, and I guess like some people just don't get as upset about them as they do in Europe. And the young people really do get upset, as that they feel that these people are coming in and taking all their government subsidies, and they're ruining their towns, and they're making it, it's changing the way that they can go out and stuff. It's still far safer in Europe than it is in America, but Americans have just accepted that our cities are no-go zones for white Americans, and we've accepted that for, over 50 years. So I think that's another difference, is that these issues come to the fore. But UK, I don't know. I don't have a full explanation of that, because once again, the Tories are very socially liberal. they're not as, their demographics aren't nearly as bad as America's. They're still over 80% white in the UK, and it's still well over 60% among young people, but they're still very vote left wing. So I don't really know. I think it could just be that the young people in the UK care more about these social services and like the welfare and stuff. And it's not like the Tories want to cut it, but there's this perception they want to cut it. So I don't know the full answer for that. But I think for America, those three issues explained is like the greater attention to social issues, which is likely to drive young people to the worst demographics here. And three is that young people, these identity issues are more in the face of young people, and they're more likely to gravitate to those parties that address those identity issues than here in America, where a lot of young people either accept the identity problems or they're just not confronted with them face to face as they are in Europe. Because a lot of these young Europeans still live in the cities and live in areas that would be unthinkable to live in America, because they're still even their most dangerous areas are still much nicer than our dangerous areas. And that's something that they haven't come to accept. Well, we've come to accept that in America. Now it's the last topic before the Common League questions is, once again, for some reason, the desire to proletarianize the entire conservative population of America is once again coming to the fore. There's a story about this Asian kid, which he had like a near perfect SAT score, perfect grades, and he couldn't get into an elite college, which illustrates the outrageousness of the racial preferences in our schools. Because we'll always hear this story about one black kid who gets like accepted into every Ivy League, and then it's like, oh, he must be so smart. It's like, no, he just had he's like one of the few that has good enough grades, and they're all desperate to fulfill that racial quota that they have, so they all offer this person a full ride scholarship. Well, if you are actually genuinely smart, if you actually do have the merit to get in, you're not being allowed in. And so regardless of whether he's Asian or not, this would be the same story with whether he's white. And I know I cherry-picked one quote out of this, but there are other people who are commenting on this. And anytime you bring up college on our side, they immediately go to like, why are you thinking about going to college? Go to trade school. And there was some woman who's like, this guy has a perfect SAT score. And it's like, he should go into the trades. He should become a plumber. And this is like a trend. There was a funny time when Peachy Keenan was talking about one of her kids who had like a very high SAT score, great grades. And she was like lamenting as like, well, everyone thinks he should be in trades. And it's like, yeah, he should be in trades. It's like, he should be a plumber. And all the replies and quote tweets were about how like her kid should absolutely just go into the trades and not go into university. And most of the people making this recommendation didn't go into the trades themselves. A lot of them are college educated. They're just boomers and Gen Xers. Somebody said it's like the new, like for boomers, it was just get a college degree and everything will be set, or have a firm handshake. For Gen Xers, it's everything problem solved is by going to trade school. And it gets into this. Now, if you have like a 1100 SAT or 1000 SAT, and they're like, well, maybe you might be better doing a trade school. I mean, that's not as unrealistic, but for like your real cognitive elite, you want them to go to university, and we have so few conservatives going into this path that it's like, you're not I've always made these points, but you're not gaining any power or influence in society by becoming a plumber. Yes, you can, depending on how you operate in your circumstances, you can have a nice life. But for people who are more cerebral, more intellectual, it's not something that they want to do. Maybe they can find contentment in it. There's like a few people like that, but most people wouldn't. And they're not going to be operating with people who are like them. People are born differently. And in a functioning society, you have different people. Different strokes for different folks. And you don't want your brainiacs to necessarily be HVAC repairmen. And you don't really want your ditch diggers to be, your Supreme Court justices. That's just how it is. And so there's different levels for it. So everyone can find their own function in society. And that's how the right should operate, because that's, we believe that people are fundamentally different. We're not egalitarians. But for some reason, there's this like real type of quasi-Marxism in this. And it's primarily promoted by people who don't no genuine working class people, or they are working class people themselves and they're bitter about their circumstances, and so they demand that everyone become a ditch digger to be on their level. And some people make good money, but there's a lot of bitterness on this. It's either out of touch boomers and Gen Xers making this recommendation, or it's a few very bitter blue collar people who want to feel superior to everyone else. And they feel that there's going to be a new aristocracy centered around people who clean toilets for a living. I don't want to be too critical, but there's sometimes it's like the real path to power. And I've seen like tons of tweets like get this, like the real path to power is becoming an HVAC repairman. It's like, you're not the one making decisions in society. You're not the one influencing how society works. And a huge problem with conservatives is that we don't have this competent cognitive elite. It's overwhelmingly liberal. And if the liberals are in total power and we're just the ones fixing their toilets, that's how the situation is. I mean, that's like we just attained demi status. And that's not really what we want. I mean, there's been tons of societies where there's a labor class and then there's a master class. And conservatives want to aspire to be the slave class. They want to be the serfs. They want to be totally removed from any centers of power from the cities. They don't want to have any position where they could influence legal decisions, political decisions, military decisions. They just want to fix the elite's toilets. And yes, you can make a good life for it. And not everyone is going to be cut out for it. But we do need the young people who are reading our stuff, who are very young, who are wondering what they should do. And generally these people have an aptitude to go to college and to become lawyers and accountants and military officers and other great things. And you don't want to encourage them to be something that would probably not be the best fit for them. And we are in desperate need of more people with the merit and qualifications to help run a state that we like. I mean, this is even a huge problem with it in the Trump administration. It's like people always complain. It's like, well, you should have made better hires. And then they really didn't have better hires. And a lot of times they hired like total clowns for some of this stuff. I was hearing a story is that, I've heard just like stories of who they were looking for to find like an FBI director or for these important roles. And they were just like going down these like lists of people that could never, definitely didn't have the ability to do this type of stuff. And it's the same even when it comes to legal cases, that a lot of times when we see guys on our side sued is that they don't have competent lawyers to come and defend them. I mean, it's like a huge problem with J6. And it's like, for some of these people, it's like these J6ers should just turn to their plumber buddy to defend them. And sometimes it is turning out to be that way and it's not going well for them. But imagine if we had like a whole cadre of competent lawyers coming to defend people who are in a situation like J6 and others. We'd be in a much better situation. So, but, I understand like the push for trade schools in the general population, because there is a lot of people who are not cut out for college. And we have been pushing this forward. But for young people who are involved in politics, who are reading stuff on Twitter, who are listening to podcasts, those people are more inclined to have the aptitude to actually do well in school. They're a lot more smarter and more intellectually curious than their peers, and it'd probably be a better fit to get them into a university and well trained in one of these positions rather than anything else. But it is also, and we need those people. We're desperate need for those people. But that's all the point. It's like, it's so funny that, they'd spent years complaining about affirmative action, and then the new conservative position is like, let's just all go to trade schools. It's like, we don't even need to worry about affirmative action. It's like, the answer to racial discrimination and higher ed, where it's preventing us from having any type of elite status and elite jobs, is just to go to trade school. And conservatives are just like on this, like, you can make $90K a year. And it's like, yeah, but you have to work your ass off and you have to work weekends and you don't have a lot of time to yourself, or you have to move to another place. Somebody was telling me about a story about a guy who had a blue collar job and he had to go to a big city. He was making very good money, but he's living in a hotel, and, he wasn't living the best life in a personal aspect. And then they found out that this guy's wife had been cheating on him for years. And that's because he was away and he's making good money. But there's these situations that happen in that a lot of people don't understand when they're just pulling anecdotes out of their ass. So, yes, it's like the new boomerism. The boomers had all these terrible advice, but now it's the new Gen Xism is like, just go to trade school. And it's like anti-white discrimination in universities, just go to trade school. The entire enemy controls all the elite professions is like, don't worry, we'll fix their toilets. And that's how our path to power. So that's always what I say. And people always criticize me and say like I'm looking down and sneering at the working class and stuff. And it's like one, I don't like this new trend to treat working class whites in the same way that liberals have this fawning attitude towards blacks, is like they're magical creatures and we imagine them in a way that they're actually not. And we try to have status by identifying with them in the same way the left does with blacks. And working class whites are not like that. Working class, there's a lot of great aspects about them, but we kind of imagine them to be something that they're not. And a lot of times if we point out any of the problems that are happening with downscale communities, from like the drug abuse, the broken families, they're having a lot of the same family issues that are not nearly as bad, but as some of the black communities. And when you point out this stuff, it's like, it's not all a rosy picture. It's not all Mayberry and working class America. These people are like, you're sneering down at us. You're talking down to us. This is bad. You hate us. And it's like, no, we're just pointing out what life is like. And these people just want uncritical adoration from whoever. And that's not what we're really about. And the second thing is, like, the main thing is that we're criticizing this fantasy of downward mobility that's primarily promoted not by working class people, but by middle class conservatives. It's like these people are living in the suburbs in a cul-de-sac. They have a college degree. They work a white collar job. And they're telling their kids, or they're telling other young people to just be plumbers. And it's, that's not the life you've had. It's just a fantasy that you don't know about, and you're recommending it to other people. And that's primarily what I'm criticizing. And if you proletarianize yourself, you're not actually gaining power. You're ensuring that you have no power in our society, and you allow the enemy to have total free reign of whatever they want to do. And so that's what I'm critical of. Everyone has their place. I'm just critical of this obsession and desire for all of us to be downwardly mobile and creating this fantasy image of working class whites, from which went to the Richmond, North Richmond stuff and other things. And people can't even get their story straight. They're either working class whites are either like this starving proletariat, this oppressed, colonized people, or they're all like making six figures and are able to afford a Bugatti, and people will make the same argument depending on which they're arguing against. So it's just silly. It's something that extends beyond Twitter, because, you can watch Fox News and they'll be recommending trade school to people, which I guess to some of the viewers, like some of those kids probably would be better off in trade school. But when it comes to Twitter, when it comes to online discourse, the young people who are wondering what to do, they have a greater aptitude to do college, and we need to get those people in positions to help the cause and help our society change for the better. And if we had a ton of base lawyers, that'd be a lot better than having even more base plumbers, because plumbers are already pretty base. We don't need to make them even more base, but we need more base lawyers. We need more keyed lawyers. And that's just something, and keyed military officers, keyed other things that require a college degree and a certain level of trying to make the best of yourself. And upward mobility, that's an important thing. We shouldn't look down on upward mobility. We're having a huge problem of losing middle class whites, and some of it is the desire to look like to be the proletariat. That is turning them off. We need more of those people, and upward mobility is still a good thing. We shouldn't sneer at it. It's not a recipe for turning everyone into a bugman. It's like if you go into these nice yuppie areas in the city, the supposed bugmen, they're all working out. They're all a lot of them are physically fit. They're outside playing, are outside, doing activities and stuff. And young people looking good. And then you go to some of the rural areas, you go to your nearest Walmart and you see a different side of humanity, which is like, once again, not sneering. I'm not trying to sneer, but I think for a lot of people, they imagine that like the people in the yuppie areas are all morbidly obese, never going outside, never working out, and totally ugly people. And then you go to the Walmart in rural area and it's all tall, like blonde-haired, blue-eyed, like Giga Chads and Stacy's. And that's not really what's happening. So now on to the Cognitive Elite questions. As a reminder, you too can get the power to ask me questions or suggest guests and topics if you sign up for the Cognitive Elite option at highly respected Substack. And that's at highly-respected.substack.com. And make sure to sign up for the IQ Supplements while you're there. So I have two questions from K Max. There's a miscommunication in getting some of his questions before, so some of these are a little bit. One of them is a little bit dated, but they're still relevant to what's happening. So. And K-Max, if you guys follow the live stream, he's always posting in there. So he's got some good questions. So his first question is resulting from the GOP debates. Did it become clear that without Trump, the talk becomes tax cuts, China, and fighting socialism? Even on crime and immigration, the candidates say we need to welcome them in and make legal immigration easier, and crime is a mental health crisis. Has Trump not moved the party more populist at all? What do you think of the GOP debates last week? Yes, I think it's actually... It's really, I don't want to give DeSantis too much credit, but DeSantis and Vivek are the only two people who show any type of change of Trump. The problem with DeSantis is that he is his personality and he doesn't go far enough. But DeSantis and Vivek are the only ones not, wanting to move the party in a different direction. But on immigration, it wasn't too bad. It's like pretty much the entire... even Tim Scott was talking about how we need to get rid of birthright citizenship. And Vivek is talking about how we need to get rid of birthright citizenship. So they're moving in the right direction on some things. And Trump has moved the party, I don't like the term populist, but more nationalist. They have moved it on. The problem is a lot of its leaders haven't gotten with the program. And we can see that with Nikki Haley. We can see that with Tim Scott. We can see that with Mike Pence. And even Doug Burgum and all these guys, they haven't really woken up to the memo. A few people are, and they're some of the candidates that are getting more notice than any other of the candidates. So I think it is a matter of just where you're looking. But the party hasn't advanced as much as we like. And that's why there's a lot more work to be done to get them to saying we need to restrict legal immigration. We need to come down hard on crime. We need to cut birthright citizenship. We need to be more critical of foreign interventionism. We need to stop waving the Israeli flag like it's our own. Those are the type of things we need to push the GOP in the right direction on. And I feel that it's just going to take time. You need more leaders like Trump to advance that. And that's why I always prefer Trump over DeSantis, because Trump, unlike DeSantis, has the ability to advance the party more in that direction. DeSantis just represents the old line party accommodating the new Trumpism and what they think it should be like, and rather than being a total advancement of America First policies. And Trump has that ability to advance the party. He has that charisma and that dynamism to make our policies at the core and the mainstream of the party. And so it's definitely disappointing with how some people really aren't advancing, in some leadership, but it'll take time and the effort is moving in the right direction. You just need to make sure that it doesn't just become the whole insane clown party. One thing I do worry about is that the GOP is waking up and they're deciding to just be more stupid with some of the people just waking up, especially with some of the conspiracy theory stuff and other things. But and that's even some of the way I think with the change on Israel stuff is that a lot of conspiracy theories are such a big part of right wing now. Is that and the conspiracy theory mindset does not lend to a lot of support for Israel, and so people follow down rabbit holes, which it leads to some good stuff. It leads them to question the government and to maybe question some of our foreign policy, but at the same time, it can lead people down to a lot of stupidity. But it's just one problem we have. But a lot of the party is advancing in the right direction. These are growing pains we're having, and hopefully the party settles on this and moves forward. And I'm more confident that the party is a lot better than it was 10 years ago. So that's always something I want to say. It's unfortunate that this isn't fully represented in the debate, but there is progress, as can be seen in Vivek and to a lesser extent, Ron DeSantis. And so his next question he has, Scott, are you saying that even though NHL has the demographics, it cannot be a Greer rule for us to support? In your view, it will never overtake baseball, even in popularity in America. Americans will still go to NFL, NBA, MLB, and then NHL in terms of popularity for team sports. I'm just saying it's more exciting than baseball. I just think it's more my, just like I grew up in the South. I think it's harder for Americans to get into as to overtake it in popularity because fewer Americans play it. It's like every kid, or at least when I was growing up, every kid played baseball. Very few kids played hockey, especially in my area. I grew up where it rarely snowed, so we were not that into hockey. We didn't even have a formal hockey team in my high school. We had a club team, and we had like every damn sport imaginable at my high school. And of course, all the college I went to, and all these SEC schools don't only have club hockey teams. So it's not something that is like as big throughout the country because a lot of this country doesn't experience snow. And I think, depending on the person, I think it's more exciting than baseball, but baseball is more something that more Americans play and have more contact with than they do with the NHL. But it's like I didn't say it was not a Greer rule for us to support. I still support NHL. NHL is still fine to watch. I mean, it's really mainly the NBA, due to it's NBA and MLS for very different reasons. MLS is just like the total redditor sport. Everyone there is a leftist who's watching it. I view it as a threat to America for this to become popular. So I'm very opposed to MLS. And they have like Antifa, like their fans, like a lot of their like clubs, like fan clubs that they have around these teams are Antifa. And it's like, why would you support that sport? It makes the NFL look like the Franco League, of how right wing they are. So no, I never said that it can't be a Greer rule for us to sport. I was just saying like why I'm not as into it as I am because I just didn't grow up around it. I didn't grow up playing it. I didn't grow up. My family wasn't that into watching it. But if your family was, it's still a great sport to watch if you want to watch it. Just not the sport I have most knowledge of or most contact with or familiarity with as other sports. So, it's never been a Greer rule to not to support. No, and the demographics make it a reason to support it. So. Hockey is fully allowed under the Greerhead pledge. So I just wanted to say this. And so moving on to the next question. The next question is from John. It's like, good evening, Scott. Good evening. We like the good evening. Do you keep up with fitness content? There is a YouTuber, Sam Sulek, who has recently gained a lot of popularity. He is obviously on a lot of steroids. I guess that's base. I was surprised at how many people do not carry that he does a ton of steroids and how normalized being steroids is within fitness circles. Is there anyone at your gym that looks like they are on steroids? As I've gotten more into fitness in the gym, this has really surprised me. Now, I've been to a lot of gyms where it's like full on steroid use. I remember there was one in the DC area I went to that had like a really it had like a basement gym and it was like there was no music playing, it was like a lot of older equipment and there were a ton of guys on gear and stuff. If you want to be on steroids, I don't know if I would put that as a pledge. I do, you do have a lot of health risks putting on steroids. I did know one guy who did steroids and he would just go and do shoulder shrugs and like joke workouts like that, and I was like, what's the point of doing steroids if you're just doing shoulder shrugs? You're supposed to go there and do like heavy deadlifts and stuff. It's like that's not the point of steroids, to do like accessory workouts. So yeah, no, they're all on steroids. Like steroid use, I remember growing up is like that was something because there was the controversy around steroid use in baseball and professional sports. And there was a lot of, that was cheating and it's like a bad health effects. But now it's like steroid use is just totally accepted because like drug use in general has been totally accepted in America. And it's a part of that. I'm not as opposed to it as smoking weed, but I do think a little, you do have a lot of other problems that come from steroid use that I think a lot of people don't acknowledge. But if you really want to just get massive, huge, and you're willing to put in the effort to take in steroids, then I guess go for it. But There's definitely a lot of health risks for it. That would not be, and if I ever did a Greer head pledge, I would not put, I will take steroids. I don't take steroids at all. I don't take any performance enhancers. I don't even really keep up with the fitness content. And sometimes I will like see like things as like how to, better ways of form and like some other techniques to do. And I'll sometimes look up that or some workouts that I should add. But it's not like I'm that obsessed with it. It's just generally, it's just something I do 4 times a week to stay in shape and stay healthy. My body type is probably not meant to be a jacked bodybuilder type, total ectomorph, ultimate ectomorph over here. But it's like you got to stay in shape, you got to work out. A lot of people always like wonder because other people's content, it's all about like hit the gym, get heavy, and it's like everyone else is doing that, and I don't really do that, but I actually do work out. You got to stay in shape, got to stay in healthy, got to keep your heart strong and healthy, got to look good, got to not be obese. So I always support that, but I don't really follow fitness content a lot. I have a lot of friends do, so I'd probably ask them about that. But yeah, steroid use is just off the charts, but I think it's just going along with like drug use in general has been accepted, and I don't think it's the best thing in the world, but between steroids and weed, I would have to say I would have to say at least steroids you're getting a benefit from. But I would definitely not recommend it. It's not on the Greer head pledge of recommended items. I don't do it. I think there's a lot of problems that come from it, but it's not like weed. So that's it. And now for our final question, and from who else it is but New England refugee. He is back and with a brilliant question for Highly Respected to end the show. And his question is, hey Scott, do you think being gay, lesbian, or bisexual is genetic? I think it's mostly genetic. Some people will get upset about this, but who would want, like even gays will tell you, it's like, who would want to be like gay? If they had a choice, they would choose to be straight. Because the type of life they live, the type of things that they're not able to experience, like, they're not able to have a normal family. They're not able to have the kid of their own with the spouse they want to choose. And there's like so many gays who are still in the closet and try to be straight. It's not as common now, but because now everyone's is allowed to come out of the closet, and there's a lot of benefits from being a protected class. But I think it is mostly genetic. Now, sometimes, like, I don't think for some people it's not like they're predestined, like they have no choice over this. For some people it is a choice. Like some people like Barack Obama, because he experimented with homosexuality in college, they have a choice whether to be straight or gay. And for Barack Obama, he chose to be straight, I guess. At least officially. I don't think he had homosexual relations outside of college. Maybe we'll find out in a biography 20 years from now that that's not the case. But it doesn't appear that he was, because he always was trying to marry a woman, and it seems, I think it was just a little phase that he had. But, he could have chosen to become gay, but he chose to become straight. I think there's some people like that where it becomes a choice, but it is mostly genetic. It is something that you're, an attraction that comes with you at birth. Because if it was fully a choice, and sometimes there's the circumstances that change people. Like, there is a high number of people who are gay, bisexual and all their things, and they've had sexual abuse as children, and, that becomes... that makes them on that path. But I think in some ways the genetics are already there for these people. I don't think it's like every one of them is sexually abused as a child. I think it's mostly the genetics are built in. And maybe that experience made them decide to be fully gay. But if it was totally down to choice, nothing to do with genetics, we'd have hardly any gays, because most people would choose to be straight. And I think it's just that they are a kid growing up, and they're not like other kids. So I would say it's mostly genetic. But there's still, for a lot of them, it's a choice. And I think the way that society, you get additional status with being gay, and you benefits. Like, I think there's certain people, like Pete Buttigieg. I think 30 years ago he would have been just straight. But now that he advanced his political career, he chose to be gay. I think he's not even, I always like that theory that he's actually not gay at all. Like he's totally straight. And this is just like showing how much of a sociopath he is, that he just did this to advance his career. But I think for someone like him, he would have, he'd been absolutely straight a few years ago. And some of it is like their social circles of how acceptable it is. Like a lot of artists, over time that they're around people like that. And this is even in the past, and they chose to be gay. But I think the genetics are already there. You're not, if you don't have like what's called the gay gene, you're not going to be gay. Okay. It's not like some guys like totally, grew up, he's totally into women. He's like, it's like boobs. Wow. And then someday he's like, oh, you know what? I think I'm gay. Nobody's going to switch their mind like that. It has to be something inborn and genetic. So that's it for Highly Respected today. That's my final take on things. We're going to have another incredible IQ supplement later this week and another great column. So be on the lookout for that. So until next time, stay respected.